Um, okay, well, I mean, you have to kind of ask yourself, I think it's really important because Mr. Byzantine Catechumen says, I'm not sure between Catholic and Orthodox, but I'm more Orthodox leaning. I really can't find any good proof of the papacy. The only evidence I got was quote mines. I mean, you kind of have to ask yourself from the beginning, like, what is a good methodology? Because at least for me personally, and I think for a lot of converts who end up studying theology, they look back at their own conversion process and they would admit that the methodology that they went about was studying the sources, the methodology that they went about with determining, is Catholicism the true church of Christ? Is Catholicism right on this and Protestantism or Orthodoxy wrong on this? A lot of them would admit that their methodology was somewhat flawed. So you have to sit back and ask yourself, like, okay, what is a methodology that I should engage in? Like, what would be sufficient evidence for me to make, an ascent of credibility for the Catholic faith? So, for example, there's, a debate on the filioque, let's say somebody conceded this is one that often a lot of Catholics will concede. They'll concede that St. John of Damascus erred on the matter of the filioque. Would you personally think that it would be somehow a a matter of complete rejection, a matter in which Catholicism is disproven, if you have a single father who happens to disagree with Catholicism on a certain matter? Well, I think most people, if they were to reflect on this, they would say, well, okay, not really. So you have to ask yourself, a lot of these online debates that we see maybe like two or three fathers being quoted, and it's not really satisfying that this is a sort of scientific way of trying to determine the consensus of the fathers. And in many cases, this limited group of fathers, is this representative of the whole? That's a perfectly valid question because it's at least we can see the possibility of the fathers disagreeing on a large scale. So again, like where are we going to and how are we going to determine this question? And even then, you mentioned quote mining. Okay, well, did you go through and somehow read massive works from the father? Read a whole work from the fathers, read comprehensively multiple different fathers. That's a methodology which isn't quote mining. Then also maybe look at how different secondary sources are employing these different parts of the fathers. It sounds very easy in the beginning, like, oh yeah, I studied the fathers and I found that Orthodoxy was correct, or I studied the fathers and I found that Catholicism was correct, or I studied the fathers and found that Oriental Orthodoxy is correct, or I studied the fathers and Lutheranism is correct, or I studied the fathers and I think Reformed theology is correct. But it's actually a lot more difficult than we think. It takes a lot more time and effort than we think. And in many cases, I think we need to ask ourselves the question, is there even a realistic way in which we could, in a whole and integral way, determine this question for your average layman? I think you need to ask yourself that because obviously you have some sort of recognition that quote mining is a bad way of going about it. So can you determine this question from this methodology? I don't know. That's sort of for you yourself to answer.